We're waiting just a moment because we can see if people coming to the live. Our first person. Hello, everyone that is coming in. We're going to give another minute or so and allow people to come in. As you come in, as you feel comfortable, be sure to share this broadcast. Share it to your personal pages, share it to groups, share with your friends, share with your family members. Come up with some theme music.
You need some music, my Griffin.
Some theme music to fill in something soon.
Soon.
Yeah. I don't know if my playlist would be
It's acceptable. You can do it.
Yeah, so I don't know what I have.
Come on. NSFW, baby.
Let's see. I don't know what to play. Oh, I don't know. So more people are coming in. Thank you all for coming in. As you come in, hey, Laurent Nelson, you send us hearts. As you all come in, please share. Please invite a neighbor, invite a friend. Thank you all for spending your evening with us. There are the numbers. They're going on up. So we're excited. Click like, click share. If you are on SAC's page for the first time just to watch this wonderful panel of gentlemen, go ahead and like that SAC page so you can keep up with us and all that we're doing and how everything is going over an hour of the Southern AIDS Coalition. I'd encourage folks that are coming in to kind of be engaged with what's going on, comment, talk to us, answer questions, ask questions, etc. And we'll pick some like 2 persons throughout the night that will win a $50 Visa gift card. So be engaged. Talk to us. Thank y'all for sharing. So it's 6:04. Start at 6:05. Hello, Ronellis. Hello, Morris. Hello, Rico. Thank you all for joining us and checking in with us. So 5 after we will dive into the conversation. Hey, Marvell. People are waving and people are speaking as we're coming in. So we'll just kind of highlight some of those in the next minute. Thank y'all. Thank you all. Thank you all. Founder Marvell Terry.
Do we have a hashtag, Marquise?
We don't have a hashtag per se. We can do hashtag SOS 2020, hashtag the virtual black print, hashtag the black print. So I am super excited about tonight. Again, click like, click share. We're going to go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us here at the Southern AIDS Coalition as we continue the discussion around Saving Ourselves Symposium. This is the conference that we were supposed to have in person in June, but because of the changes in the world, we had to go a different route. This is the conference that is about Black LGBTQ plus people, HIV, and all of the intersections that impact their lives concerning that. And we wanted to keep this conversation fresh. We want to keep SOS on your minds. We want to let you know that we had not forgotten about SOS. And while it has changed hands from the founder, who is online, Marvell Terry, we wanted you to know that we are just as committed today as we were when we submitted that RFP to say that we wanted to take SOS and run with it because it's a vital part of what happens in the South, particularly for Black gender-loving folk, Black LGBTQ plus folk. I am Marjorigas Harris, Senior Manager of Capacity Building here at the Southern AIDS Coalition. And I am the lead team member that kind of helps coordinate and put SOS together. And so that was a part of my portfolio. And these are a series of conversations that we're going to be doing every other Thursday through the month of October. This is the second one. So for those of you that were able to chime into the first one with Mandisa and Charles Stevens, that was a robust conversation. It was blackity black, black, black. I mean, hella black. And we love every minute of it. So, but this week we're going to talk about the importance and the inclusion of Black same gender loving men, whether they be cis men or trans men, in clinical research as it pertains to HIV. And of course, as with everything else that's going on in the world, we're going to put a little COVID in and how their research is looking. So we're going to talk about all of these wonderful things tonight. So I think I have said all that I need to say. I am going to push it over and have the panelists introduce themselves, and we can go in the order that we see on the screen. And so when you introduce yourself, give us your name, your pronouns, and answer the question. You can also give your affiliations and then answer the question, how did you end up in clinical research? What brought you here? What was your motivation, etc.? So take it away, Daniel.
Oh, okay. Hey, everyone. Again, it's amazing to see you all. I am Daniel Griffin. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. Pronoun is he, him, his, but anything will work with respect. I work with D3 Consulting, which is a small private consulting agency assisting health departments, community-based organizations truly engage with men of color living with HIV. So what brought me to clinical research? I had to say, like, the two folks underneath this picture are some of the ones who brought me to what research is. As a young person living in Rochester, New York, having folks like Laurent, having folks like Stefan, Sheldon Mitchell, urged me to do something more in public health, or not even knowing what public health was at the time. So being a young person now to a middle-aged young person, I'm just going deeper into research as I began my doctoral degree in public health in 3 weeks with Georgia State University. So that is the bringer to researcher for me.
Awesome, thank you. Dr. Wallace.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. So my name is Stefan Wallace, and I go by he, him, his pronouns. I am based in Seattle, Washington. I have lots of affiliations. I wear lots of hats. So I'm the Director of External Relations for the HIV Vaccine Trials Network and the COVID-19 Prevention Network. Clinical Assistant Professor at the University of Washington's Department of Global Health. Staff scientist in the Vaccine Infectious Disease Division at Fred Hutch as well. And I'm also the chairman and CEO of the House of Blahnik. So what brought me to clinical research is actually one of my co-conspirators and good friends, best friends really, the icon Damon Humes, aka Jay Blahnik, who really sort of guided me in this direction through our friendship and mentorship, working in Rochester at the time, the MOCA Center, in partnership with the University of Rochester Medical Center on a grant to conduct a research study. So that was my introduction, working also with Laurent and Sheldon and all the other folks that Daniel just mentioned in the process. So yeah, it's been great.
Awesome, thank you.
Hello, good evening. I am Laurent Nelson, and I go by he, him, his pronouns. I am Associate Dean for Global Affairs and Planetary Health at Yale University, and also the Independent Foundation Associate Professor of Nursing at Yale. I also do work in Toronto, Canada, at a place called St. Michael's Hospital. So in their research center, I am a scientist and OHTN research chair in implementation science with Black communities. Now, how did I come to clinical research? So this is a Rochester story, but I was in nursing school and I just remember not being satisfied and not even doing well in school because something wasn't connecting for me. I could go on the floor and do the work, but it wasn't until I met a professor, Jean Grace, who introduced me to research, and she helped me understand that there was more that I needed, that I had an investigative sort of mind. And I wish somebody told my elementary school teachers that, because I think they misinterpreted what was going on with me a long time ago. But it's just that I needed to know more in order for me to sort of grapple with stuff. And that really it wasn't until I got into research that I started to sort of find sort of myself, my grades improved. And so it was sort of a career that was set out for me because it was working for me. So that's how I ended up here, was just finding what was working.
Awesome. So thank you all for sharing. As you all can see, people are already engaged and having full conversations. So this is going to be an exciting conversation. And while I love being on this screen with all this Black boy joy, this beautiful Black men, I am going to ask the first question, and then I'm going to move out and allow these three gentlemen, who are the subject matter experts, to have a conversation, right? It's going to be open, it's going to be honest, it's going to be candid. You all feel free to ask your questions in the screen. We will highlight them and have them be able to respond to you all. So let's just have a conversation. Let's have a chat. First question, and then after the answer, I'm going to pull myself out and let you all have the studio to yourselves. Why is it important to include Black same-gender loving men in clinical research, specifically HIV research?
I'm throwing it to Dr. Nelson first. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, there are a number of reasons, but I think the first reason is that research ends up producing evidence that ends up being translated into different things, policy, sometimes products, and then they're applied to people. And we don't want to be in a situation where research is being conducted and evidence generated and applied to us, but the research didn't consider us, or it wasn't informed by our lives, our everything. And so that's a big reason in my mind why it's important, is because it is going to show back up at our doorstep in one way or the other, and we'll be subject to the sort of policies and products that come from it. And so we don't want to be in a situation where so for example, the other day I was at a friend's house and they were showing me this monitor that can measure your blood oxygen. And so these were two white people, so not quite the same example, but anyway, so they were showing me theirs, and so I went to do mine, and I said, oh, I think the battery died. And then they said, no, it was just working. So we tried it again. I said, I know, I'm a nurse, I know how to do this, it's not reading. So he tried it on himself again, it showed a reading. And so I made a joke, it was kind of a joke, but not really. It was like, I wonder if they included Black people in the trial when they were developing this product that clearly is not reading through the color of my skin. So anyway, that was a joke, but it's kind of serious. There are things that happen that we end up being subject to that has not taken sufficiently our lives into account. So that's the main reason why I think it's important, particularly in clinical research, because that has real life and death consequences.
Dr. Wallace, you want to go?
Yeah, I just think, I don't have anything substantively different than what Laurent has offered. I think the policy piece is really, really important. And just having data that represents us as a group. And the diversity of people, I think, is really important. Laurent's example of the pulse oximeter makes sense to me, especially when I think about other things. You know, I think about PrEP as an example, or antiretrovirals that are used for treatment. It's important that we understand how these things work for us, and not just from the clinical perspective or a pharmacokinetics perspective, but also from a social and behavioral perspective.
Absolutely. You know, I think of those powerful words of, if you're not, you know, at the table, you're on the menu. And I think so very often when we look at any study, you know, it's the study will be talked about on every news channel, every radio show. But then when you go to the first table of any paper, it's less than 5 or 6% African American, and you're like, girl, okay. You know, so how true does this speak to our community? You know, so if we are not there at every step of the way, from development, implementation, evaluation, and the translation process, we're being left behind.
Awesome. And as you all can see, this group of people are watching, they are very eager, and they're already asking the good questions, the tough questions, the hard questions. One follow-up to that question, someone posted, Laurent Nelson posted, the whys are good, but how do we get them involved? And then he said, well, us involved. So why, and now how do we translate that into actually getting people more involved?
I think that getting people involved starts with truly ensuring that our research teams are diverse as possible. You know, so that not only includes like race and ethnicity, but it also includes sexual orientation, gender expression. It even includes, you know, just different walks of life. I can't tell you the number of times, you know, I'm included in protocol teams with super educated folks, you know, but it's about putting the rubber to the road. No, I won't say that example, but it's truly like having lived experience there to assist us in the process of involving all of our community members.
Yeah, I think too, you know, I don't know how much it is about, I mean, it is about encouraging Black at the same gender level men to participate, but some of it is the environment, the research environment that we create, and whether or not it is attractive to people to participate. And I think that there is some work that needs to happen about the manner in which we try to engage people. You know, I spend a lot of time in research talking about how we incentivize people to participate, right? So we have these meetings and groups, and there's always that we use people's time, and that is what research participation is. It's time. And then some of what we do in terms of how we compensate people is an evaluation of how valuable we think that time is. And people aren't stupid. They see the big names on the banners, and they know that these drugs ain't costing $1. Like this, somebody making some money in this study. And so why you want me to come to this site 12 times for 2 hours for $10 or whatever? And I think people see it as, I guess there was another comment about people don't trust it, but I think people feel like this is shady. And like, why put myself through this system that is sort of saying that it doesn't value me and my time? And so I think part of how we engage people is figuring out how to restructure these systems that are trying to engage them in ways that are more humane and that show that we value Black folks and Black SGL folks to participate in this.
You brewing on something, Stefan?
Well, you all have addressed a couple of levels, and I think, like with most things, that we need to look at this from an ecological lens, and that there are different ways, and there are different places in which we're not connected. And approaches are needed at all of the levels that you've described. All of the ways in which funding happens that supports the research that is done in our communities. And we really need to take a concerted effort and examination and look at what is scientific literacy like in our communities and how do we develop and foster that? Because, you know, some of this is about the natural engagement and curiosity and interest. Like there are people who will gravitate to do this work because they just have a natural curiosity. There will be people who sort of get exposed and that curiosity will be sort of developed and enhanced. But how do you develop that for other people who are not naturally connected to these processes and systems? And to me, it's not just about the process of engagement, but it's also thinking about what is missing. You know, if we spend a lot of time, as Laurent mentioned, thinking about the processes and steps to engage people. But what does literacy and around science look like? You know, people's jobs, like people get paid a ton of money to work on literacy around health. And there are, you know, huge funding streams that support this, but it doesn't really seem to be intersecting with our communities. And that to me is a challenge.
Got it. So, you know, as soon as you're mentioning, you know, alleviating challenges, of course, the next conversation should be on equity, you know? So, like, how are we and how have you, too specifically, you know, built equity into the research that you all sit at the table with?
Well, I'll say, you know, I think I experiment with different things, but much of it is trying to first structure the room, the so-called room, because a lot of what happens is because somebody has authority to say it will happen or it will not. And I think that there can be different appreciation for community interests, Black SGL men's interests and needs that may look one way if you are in fact the Black SGL man, and may not look the same way if you're not. And then what gets prioritized. And so part of it is trying to structure teams in ways that usually create some type of tension, but necessary tension, because for a lot of work I do, particularly with white straight folks, it would be easy for them for me just to say nothing, or for us to just say nothing. So then there would be no tension. So the tension is that there are interests. The interests are they are culture. They're already embedded, even if these are white folks, for example, straight folks. Like it's not like there's no culture involved. Of course there is, and so it will mean that the interests of or the cultures of other people or sexuality won't get prioritized the same way because it's not even embedded in the person's logic. That's not the life they live. So part of how I try to promote equity is first making sure any team I'm on, especially if it's work with Black SGL men, that Black SGL men need to be all up and through on the team. And then to take a responsibility. Sometimes, shall we be saying this? Sometimes I don't even. Sometimes if the meeting going too smooth, I'm like, no, something wrong. I got to say something, and I find something to say because it's just. But anyway, part of that is I think is important because I think there are ways that we can be lulled into cooperating with systems and processes that don't necessarily have to benefit our community in the ways that they could. So that maybe I'll come back around to that later in the discussion, but for now, that's some of the things I do.
Thank you for
So
that.
I'm ready to unpack. I think that equity requires a lens and an intentional effort to dismantle the forces and factors that contributed to the inequity. And so there are different ways that can happen. Laurent sort of spoke to a couple of them in different ways. And so, ensuring that there are people who represent what they refer to as unrepresented populations are part of protocol teams.
So it's hard to reach people.
Well, I don't use that language. And whenever that language is said in my presence, I address it. And I don't give a shit who's listening. I remember going to AIDS 2018 in Amsterdam, and there was a panel of researchers, and one of them in particular was talking about engaging Black MSM and trans persons in North Carolina and how they were hard to reach. And please know and note that I put that ass on blast when the Q&A came up. And she didn't like me and didn't look at me for the rest of you, but you know how I feel about stuff like that. Like, there's a laundry list of people who don't like me. So baby, add your name to it. But I think that we need to really address this at the individual level with researchers and institutions. And I think that we need to also address this systemically and structurally, because the other part is that there are people who are doing this work at different levels. And I think about, even for me, having to go into certain spaces, thankfully not in my primary places of employment, where I'm constantly sort of having to articulate and defend Black people's right to be in the room. And I don't feel like I should have to do that. Like, I feel like, and what I mean by that is that if people are really about this Black Lives Matter stuff that, everybody's jumping on the bandwagon of, like, there's some conversations that I just don't feel like I should have to have. Because if you say that you're the ally that you think you are, then I need you to actually demonstrate that. To me, allyship is not spoken, it's demonstrated. So again, thinking about addressing the question of equity in this process, it's a multi-tiered approach. There are multiple levels of issues. I still think about the fact that the majority of people who are doing research in our communities don't look like us. And that people who are well qualified to do that research are often not funded. And if they're even scored, right, they're not given fundable scores. So there's a whole lot of politics to this process. And honestly, when I think about equity and what it means in its truest sense, it means white people are going to have to give up power. And I'm convinced that most people are not ready to do that.
Well, I guess we could turn the cameras off and. So literally, this is the same conversation that's going on in the comments right now. So Zachary, hey, shout out to Zachary. Can we talk about when we do try and make these spaces, the pushback we get, and how we have to justify every move we make? And I think you just alluded to that. How not understanding why we still have to explain Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and on email Saturday and Sunday, why we need more than one Black MSM for our community advisory board folks, why we need more Black and brown people in everything, why just stop using stock images to speak. So jump in. I would say, I would think about instantly, we see the importance of the diversity on our research teams, but maybe can you all talk to the importance of ensuring that the principal investigators, the people at the top, also look just like the folks in the community?
Yeah, I'll say I've had some examples of teams on larger studies that were all Black or Black led. And this is a bit to Zachary's comment too, that it's a big difference. When Dr. Sheldon Fields and Dr. Darrell Wheeler were leading the HBTN study, it was a big difference. there was a lot we didn't have to explain. You didn't have to say it 10 times for people to get it. You didn't have to always finish the sentence for people to get, yep, we know, yep, that's what we should be doing. It was like, it was feeling like free, like for a minute. And in ways that it does feel very, the need to justify everything, like the sense that there's this gaze that's making sure you're doing it right, or that you have to somehow satisfy not doing something that you think is good because it's blackity black and this is what we know gonna work, but something that white people will accept, and that's stressful. And I'm not saying that it vanishes when the investigators are black or black and same gender loving, but when it's not, it's there, and it's a lot of pressure and it's a lot of extra work that that many of us on this, on the screen and off, try to do in an effort to make sure that we have studies that Black SGL men will participate in, that they won't be harmed, not necessarily physically, but even socially and mentally, about how we engage them or create ways that disengage them. It is a lot of work, and so part of what I really do believe in, and I've been doing some of this work with my role in Canada, is we had to create pipelines to get people prepared and trained to do this type of work, and we have to also create opportunities for people to do this type of work. And Stefan talked about power, and I think it ain't just white people, but there's a lot of folks who are in power who don't want to give it up. And there's a lot of folks who are qualified and ready and who could be taking us to higher heights, different places. But I do think people get sort of wedged in. I guess that's with any industry. But I think that training people so that we don't have to ask for this, nice white lady or white man to help do this study in this community, because then you have to make sure the study you end up with is their interpretation of the issue, right? That's always the issue with principal investigators. And so I think you'd be in a better situation where there's Black SGL men who are the ones interpreting what this study will actually look like. It's not foolproof, but I believe in that.
And if I could just add for just a second, because there's something powerful that happens in some international spaces that I think is a potential lesson or a best practice that folks might want to consider how we adopt and incorporate here. And that is, in many settings internationally, when people come to do research in communities, if the community is not forward, they will shut it down.
Yeah.
I don't know that we have that here. And by that, I mean that mindset. I mean that perspective, that sort of advocacy platform that says we're not going to take anybody coming into our communities treating us any kind of way, period. It's going to look the way that it needs to look, and we're going to inform the process. There's definitely some people around here that I know who are about it, who are, down for the cause. But there are movements of people like this in international spaces. And I think that when I think about how to address some of this, to me it sort of goes back to interest and and scientific literacy, like how connected and how vested are people in to this particular issue. And if you see people come into your community doing research that you don't agree with, what are you going to do? Are you going to be powerful or powerless?
I'll never forget, years ago, I was in Ghana. It was me, Marlon Bailey, Leo Wilton. We were storming a conference called ASWAD because they were talking about HIV, and there was nobody on the program that was talking about Black gay men, so we had a problem with that. But anyway, we were in Ghana, and there was a group of people who found us at a hotel. We thought it was, anyway, they were friendly people. And so, we talked to them, and so these were same gender loving men in Ghana. Maybe it was like 10 or 12 of them. Mac Darling Kobina was the ringleader. But they had come and they said, we need research done, and we need it done in these areas. Now, at the time, none of us had done research in Ghana. Maybe Leo had done some. But we were sort of stunned that a group of folks in the community had identified questions that needed answers. And so it wasn't like somebody was going out trying to convince them about the importance of research. They had said, listen, we need research in this area. We need it done this way. And the people here won't do it because they're worried about working with gay people or same-loving people. And they're worried about, can they really address this issue without being targeted in church or back at school? And here's what we want done. And can you do it? And it was astonishing, because having grown up in America, I couldn't think of an example. I'm sure there might be a few, but not of folks who had set a particular research agenda at that time and said, we're going to find the right people who are going to do this. And if you can do it, all our people, all our crew, our networks, they'll participate. And in the country in West Africa, I can tell you, I've never had trouble recruiting anybody into any study. And I think that's mostly because the community themselves were already organized around what research they wanted done. And as long as I was doing what they wanted me to do, it was all supported. It's been 10 years. So I do think that type of mindset, I think it does exist in some ways in the US. But I do think there are ways that our communities can be more organized and be drivers of research, and not just people who are subject to other people's research ideas.
So I want to jump in really quick, Dr. Nelson. You mentioned the pipeline earlier, right? And then Dr. Wallace, you talked about a piqued interest. So when we talk about these terms and talk about like Black folks being included in research as well as leading the research, so what does that look like? How do we translate the knowledge that you all potentially have as researchers into information that could pique the interest of other same gender loving Black folk that may be coming up behind you? How do we create that pipeline? What makes it interesting? Typically we can say that because it's about you, because it's going to benefit you, but we know that doesn't work for everybody. What are things that we can do, like to create? How do people get into research, even if I do have interest? Like some places are hard to get into. So can y'all talk a few? That's a lot of questions, it's loaded, but can y'all kind of talk through like some of those things that how do we work this pipeline? What does the pipeline look like? Like how do you pique an interest of someone who appears to have no interest? So yeah, take it away.
I think we need to deconstruct this sort of the platform that is research, and I think it's helpful to also clarify that you don't need a PhD or an advanced degree to be a researcher. Something that Sheldon taught me or shared with me when I first started really getting into clinical research is that the difference between myself and the other researchers in the room was just our training and our language around describing things. Really, people have an understanding of concepts, but they may not have the language or the same language to describe it, right? And so I think it's important to clarify that. And people who have an interest, or people who or at least willing to have the conversation around it, I think that's a really good place to start. And to also to really parallel research with other things that people do, other things that people have engaged in. Half of the medications that you walk into a pharmacy and see on the shelf, and these are just the over-the-counter ones, went through clinical research studies, and they were tested, there were placebo controls and all this. So research happens all the time. Some of it's clinical, some of it's observational, some of it's applied. There's different kinds of research. And so I think really unpacking what that is and demystifying this process, so that, I really think that would really be helpful to, really start having these conversations. And because people do deduction all the time. They just don't think about it in the same way, right? And they apply research concepts, but they don't have the language around it, the academic language, right? And so I think we really need to deconstruct this. Black folks do research all the damn time.
Researching. I I think about earlier this week, this viral video started going around, and it's what I assume to be an Asian guy watching this white woman on BBC make rice. Okay, and the lady pulls out a strainer, and he stops outright. He's like, "Sister, you didn't wash the rice. Like, you gotta wash it and make sure it's clean." She used a strainer. She then takes all the rice out the pot and bakes it, and he's like, "No, and that's a research project." He's like, "How are you gonna eat this nasty mess at the end of it?" So I definitely think it's talking. Researching is, will X do Y? And just building a set of instructions around it. I had a research problem today. Which shirt in my closet would fit me the best sitting here, since I've been eating at home since March, This one works. That's why we're sitting back from the camera, but this one works. It's all research. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I agree. I think, to Stefan's point about demystifying things, I think some of the language that we use is, I understand the need for precision, but I think some of it is exclusive for the purpose of excluding people who could otherwise understand what you're talking about and then be engaged in the conversation. Because, right, people get the concepts, but the language itself is, I think, in some ways designed to be inaccessible to protect, power and access to resources about this. So that is one. I was going to say early exposure, and maybe the pipeline starts earlier than we're talking, but like in primary school, where how people understand and learn science, if it's so disconnected from their life, people, I don't know, I think it may be hard to get into when you're talking about science and abstract things. The folks so to go to the example of the folks in Ghana who I work with, their understanding of research is connected to what they need in their life. And they can even talking about a drug trial, they can understand PrEP and all that, as if they can think about what it means for whether or not I'm more or less likely to get HIV if I get exposed to it. So I think, right, people can understand this if we want them to. And if we create ways that allow this world to be more accessible, I think people will engage. But I don't, you have to be very motivated. And Stefan said this earlier about people who really have strong curiosities to jump through the hoops to be here. I think the issue is that we should stop putting up hoops for people to have to jump through if we really want to make it accessible and but create situations where people can come through this pipeline because they can see it as relevant and attainable.
Our brother Dante from Texas wrote in a couple of moments ago. And the question, again, thinking about those pipelines and increased capacity. So the question is, how do Black organizations compete for better than adequate funding? Especially as we think about ending not only HIV, but now we're gonna have to be ending COVID. So how do we build capacity at our Black organizations moving forward? I want to throw it to Dr. Wallace first, especially and come to it with the COVID ones first.
I think it's tiered, and I think it intersects with some of what we've been talking about. I think that our organizations have not been supported to grow and to sort of shift and change with the times. So resources have shifted in priority. And I don't think that Black organizations, by and large, have been prepared for those changes and shifts. I also think that I remember years ago when this whole medical model thing was just an idea. And, you know, predominantly white institutions started mobilizing almost immediately to become FQHC so that they could, you know, bill out for additional services and rake in the revenue. And our organizations didn't really have a lot of support around that. You know, I remember attending an executive directors meeting at the NASM conference in 2011. This was in Brooklyn, New York, at the Marriott there. And I remember how many Black EDs were around the table. And I reflect on that often because many of those organizations no longer exist. So there's a lot going on with our Black organizations with respect to leadership, with respect to sustainability. The philanthropy, Black philanthropy doesn't look the same. So organizations can go out and, you know, predominantly white organizations can go out and fundraise millions of dollars a year to support their programs and services that are unrestricted. Like they can do whatever they want with that money. And our organizations don't have access to those kinds of philanthropic platforms. And then there's, of course, the obvious racism, right? And so why would, privileged, white folks with tons of money give to Black organizations? What would be the incentive for them to do that? So
I was having a conversation with Sister Kaita Mtefa about this question, and she was saying part of the problem is just what Stefan just mentioned, that many nonprofits operate on a fundraising model to a philanthropic sector that ain't trying to give them no money, and that there needs to be other ways to work with Black organizations to build their capacity, to find other sources of revenue that are sustainable, that don't require them to have to ask people for money at all, and that maybe connections between business sectors and nonprofits or philanthropy or whoever haven't happened the way they should happen. And we actually thought about what could something like that, how would that look? Because if all your money comes from a federal agency or a state agency and they decide it's trouble. And a lot of agencies have, to Stefan's point, a lot of agencies have gone away because all the eggs were in one basket. And to the other point too, capacity is one thing. Diversifying revenue streams and that are sustainable and under the organization's control is two, but it is not even always that Black organizations cannot compete or that are not competitive. Because I've seen situations where I'm like, this is a horrible proposal. And I don't understand how these people around this table are giving it thumbs up. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is going to get funded. And it's a horrible proposal, but it's like people have already decided for whatever was in the mix, it's my friend or my mentor worked there or whatever. Like, it's not always about merit. It's about who's around the table, evaluating what's a serious issue or what's not. What do we really have to look at? Like, oh my God, I found 3 typos on the second page. How can we trust them with any money? And the other one is like, oh, well, there's 4 typos on this white straight person proposal. It's like, yeah, but they're managing multiple grants and they've been successful before. And so I think we should give them the benefit of the doubt. And it's like, wait, we're talking about the same eras. And so there's this push to overlook it. It's not such a big deal. It don't really mean anything for one agency, and the other agency, it's going to be enough to take them out. So I think we have to be like, our work has to sparkle, it has to shine to even get a shot. But just because it shine, don't mean it's going to go anywhere. And just because you didn't get funded didn't mean because it wasn't competitive. So that's also about really understanding the system, and so not being totally reliant on it because it's not a fair system. A lot of us can get through, we can push through, make it nice, and be successful in some of these grand operations. But I wouldn't want to give anybody a sense that it is completely a meritorious system. A lot of Black agencies aren't funded because somebody wanted to give the money to somebody else. That's it. Not because they weren't strong or good enough.
Or because the ED didn't stay in their place.
Yep. Punishment. Right.
So question, I want to take a quick turn here. And so audience members, you all have been great. Continue to put questions in the comments. Continue to let us know what you want to hear about, so we can kind of answer some of those questions. But in the interim of you all doing that, you all have been great. Continue to share. Continue to let people know. So we talked about a lot of pipelines. We talked about folks being involved, why it's important, why it's necessary. So, we cannot have a conversation about Black folk in research, Black folk in clinical research, and not move the conversation towards what mistrust still looks like in 2020. So how do we associate or reconcile the fidelity of clinical trials, the participation of clinical trials, the ask of people to volunteer and give their time to be into clinical trials with medical mistrust? Does it still play a role? How is it still showing up? How do we reconcile these two conversations even in 2020? Hello, Stefan's faces. Yeah.
Laurent should go first.
I should go first?
Yes.
No, Daniel should go first.
These are the things that keep me up at night. I sit in a barbershop every other week, right, to get my hair did and everything like that. And I think our barbershops are the most interesting places in the world, okay? Today's discussion actually was, so when the white people create that vaccination, are you going to take it? Okay? And I'm sitting there with a mask on, literally like writing things down, okay? And it boils down to, it's only 4 folks in the shop. 3 of the 4 said no, because, the first wave ain't gonna work, okay? And it's another way for them to get rid of us. And I asked, where's that coming from? And instantly it goes to, well, my grandmother was in the hospital. They gave her the wrong medication. She died. They told my grandfather his cancer was gone, but he went back 3 weeks later and it's all over his body. So I think not only as researchers and research as an entity, but just like the medical everything owes our people such an apology. And it ties to the scientific literacy conversation, and being able to really unwrap layer by layer, question by question, until we truly get to the root at the simple things like, what is it going to do? Why do you need it? And how, does it get done? I mean, I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. Now, I talk long enough. Go ahead.
I think
So,
medical mistrust is an experience, and it is a phenomenon that we have to acknowledge, and we have to affirm. And what I mean by affirm is that we have to affirm how people really feel about these situations and experiences. It doesn't mean that we sort of remain there in a conversation. But I think affirming people where they are is how you get people to understand that that one I think is a process of building trust with in talking to a person as a provider, as a clinician, or even as a researcher. But I also think it's recognizing that there are values and beliefs that people hold that may be different from yours, but that have actual impacts in their life. And I think we need to sort of do that. The other piece of that is we need to also begin to educate people about what has happened as a result of these horrendous acts against Black people, against Native people, against Latin folks. You know, I think about Guatemala and that whole experience with folks down there. There have been many instances where researchers have not centered the needs and the interests of communities and participants in the studies. There have been huge reforms in how and the policies that guide participant protections in clinical research and research broadly. You know, institutions are required to, follow the guidance of institutional review boards now, who are independent folks who have nothing to do with the research study. And those folks are designed to protect participants' rights. For clinical studies, particularly those done in the US, they have federal policies that they have to follow regarding the submission of information and materials that has to be reviewed by quite a few different folks to make sure that rights are being protected. There's data safety monitoring boards that are in place. These folks are completely independent to the process. They're reviewing data in real time, and they have the ability to stop studies if they see potential harm for participants in studies as well. So I think sort of educating people about where we are with these situations, I think, is also a really important transition point. And then to recognize that that no industry is perfect. There's no process by which anything done by human beings will ever be perfect. And so I think part of that process of moving beyond the mistrust and sort of owning the relationship that we have with researchers and with research is by our involvement, and how we get involved and how we ensure that when researchers are designing these studies, if they're researchers that don't represent our communities, that we're reviewing the protocols, we're reviewing the informed consent forms, we're really involved in these processes. And I think that will really help to also in real time shift what's happening and shift people's perceptions about this as well.
And I think that, the truth is researchers can do whatever they want to do to a degree. I think some of this adherence to this so-called purity in clinical trials is a way to ignore other real concerns that people have, to say we can't do it because we are prioritizing the trial design over the people who we want to push through this design. And I remember for HIV prevention trials study 073, being at a meeting, they actually summoned us. So this goes back to the earlier question about having to justify things. They summoned me and Sheldon Fields and Darrell Wheeler and Ken Mayer, I think even Ron Saul was in this, to NIH to explain to them how we were going to do a study of PrEP use with Black same-gender loving men, where they were going to give them all these services, but the men did not have to take PrEP. And we were like, so is this right? So like, yeah, that's the study. they can come in, they can have all these needs, and we're gonna have a system set up to address these needs. And at the end of the day, they could say, no, thank you, I don't want your prep. And we're gonna enroll them. And we had to, so first it was saying, somebody said, so somebody's going to help them get housing and transportation. Like when I go to my doctor, nobody helps me with my mortgage or getting a car. Somebody said this to a group of researchers in DC. And we said, listen, this is how we're going to do it. Either we're going to do it this way or somebody else going to do some different type of study. But we don't want to waste people's time. Like we're asking people to trust us. PrepWith had been around for a while from the grant study, but now we were going specifically to target this in communities, in Black communities, and targeting cisgender loving men with this medication that not everybody knew about and not everybody trusted. And so if, as a precondition to getting all these services for issues that you needed to address, we told you had to take PrEP, it would have reinforced the mistrust issue. Like something's up. Like I think you can understand why people would say that is suspicious. And the idea, but this is the kicker, right? So in the context where we said, listen, y'all, it's a 12-month study. Here's the schedule. Here's all the stuff that's involved. And PrEP is also available. And if you think it's something that works for you, take it. And there's a system set up to support you. And if you don't think it's the thing for you right now or maybe later, it's okay. System's still set up. We can figure out ways to help support you to get through, right? So it was optional. It was always optional. So that was off the table. Somebody thinking, oh, these guys are trying to get me in this study just so I can take this pill. Nope, you ain't got to take the pill at all if you don't want to. And most people took it, right? So the idea that if we could address the mistrust, there were the things that we did, I think made people feel like, okay, so if I don't have to do this at all, maybe this is legit. And maybe they aren't really trying to push this because we say it's optional. And some people tested it, like, well, let me make sure I'm here for my incentive, and I don't want. So okay, here you go. You know, you're all good. See you next 2 months. But my point is, the mistrust is real, and I think that thing is not just historical. There are things that we can do now that I think can contribute to that, and there are things that we can do now how we design studies that can minimize that and make it more likely that people give us a chance to see maybe this is legit, I'll try it. And I think 073 is a good example of a situation where people weren't even taking PrEP nationwide. The rates of Black MSM were low. And our uptake was over, I think almost 2/3 had taken it. So anyway, it's a serious issue. Oh, let me just say something else about that. So Stefan talked about validating people's feeling around it. And I think it's important because, Daniel, we were in South Carolina and I was listening to people's stories. These guys were telling stories about things that happened to them, people coming to their house, calling their phone, disclosing their status. Like I can tell you, I don't know why I was astonished, but I was astonished. Like I wonder what world I was living in that this was really happening to people. So you can imagine people not trusting these systems that do this to them right now. There was this concern about, so anyway, I think the mistrust is in many ways, there's a lot of evidence. See, people do research, right? They know how to evaluate evidence. There's a lot of evidence that tells them you shouldn't trust this thing. And I think we have to acknowledge that there's a lot of examples that people can point to that say this is a risk. If you do this, chances are, based on everything else that happened around you, these folks going to get you. And we have to pay serious attention to that.
I literally still remember the first DIS person I came in contact with back in 2010, and I still look at them hoes sideways. Okay, just because of the negative relationship that was built, and it didn't have to be that way. You know, I think we hear folks say, "Oh, this organization or this person." You know, we meet folks where they are, No, you don't, sis. We are not meeting people where they are. You know, we are demanding we are demanding them, you know, to come to our office from 9 to 4:30. If you show up after 4:15, well, sis, I'm gonna have to reschedule you for tomorrow because I gotta go home. Okay, and we don't get overtime. And I understand you caught the bus over here, but you didn't think of taking the earlier bus, you know? So I definitely think all of that goes into everything that we're talking about. It's truly like the relationship building. Not even rapport, relationships. Like all of these things are pieces of our relationship, and it's whether or not, you know, folks will stay connected to us, whether or not we'll see them at the next appointment, at the appointment after that, or even if they'll answer a text message, you know, to just keep in touch with us. So, yeah.
So, thank you all for sharing that. The next thing I'd like to just talk about. So, thank you all. You all are really commenting, and some of them are really detailed comments, and we absolutely appreciate that. Hopefully, we're getting everybody's comments and questions on the screen, and the panelists are having time to read them. If you need something reshown, just let us know. But I want to ask about this because we're talking about the intentional inclusion of Black same gender loving men in clinical research. How do we meaningfully merge the inclusion of Black same gender loving men, both cis and trans, into the conversation, and why is that necessary? I see eyebrows going up.
Go first.
Yeah. What do we dasa? Yeah.
I don't know. That's a deep question. I think that I don't have a fancy answer for it. Like, to me, it's just I mean, bringing them into that is one thing, which is I just think designing studies that are about and for Black same gender loving men. But the how, is that what you're asking? How do we do it?
Yeah. So it's about like meaningfully merging those things, right? Because when we talk about same gender loving men, right? That could be a cis man who loves another cis man, or that could be a trans man who loves a cis man, which still equates to two men, which would be same gender loving men. Is it necessary for us to meaningfully merge? And I'll change the question. The inclusion of Black same gender loving men in certain elements of research to be included cis men and trans men. Do we need to create studies for that? Do we need to how do we structure that conversation? What does that? We know it's important. It's about like how do we do it? How do we meaningfully merge? Do we merge them? Do we keep them separate? Let's talk about it.
To me, this is I guess because it's something that I do and it's something that I'm involved in. It doesn't quite feel like a challenge, but I think part of it is going back to some of our earlier conversation about who's being engaged to really inform the design and implementation of studies. And so that's part of it. So if we're talking about same gender loving people, that would be inclusive, irrespective of the sex assigned at birth, right? And so I think also from an equity lens and perspective that we need to, I think that we need to reconsider and change our language around what it means to be same gender loving and gay and how we use that language, because I think that it's often focused on cisgender men. That isn't necessarily the way that I interpret it, but I know that that's the way that many people in our community do. And it marginalizes Black trans men, and I don't think that we need to get into or we need to be at a place where we're perpetuating oppression in a group. So I to me how do we meaningfully engage Black same-gender loving men completely in the design and implementation of clinical trials. And honestly, that inclusion piece is really important as well, because my argument is and has always been, unless there's a clinical contraindication for someone's participation in a clinical study, I think that they should be included.
This is something to think about. I several times, using this term, Black same-gender loving men, Black same-gender loving men, and thinking about like what it means in a research context, and whether or not researchers are really interested in Black same-gender loving men, or are we interested in cells and mucosal membranes that we can test for concentrations of medication, right? And is it really interested in these particular parts of people that can help us answer specific questions that are abstracted from their life that we may not really care much about at all, and that shows up. And I think that could be a shift in how we approach research. That if we are recruiting if we say this is a study for Black same-gender loving men, cis and trans inclusive, like how is that really showing up in the study? Because these people aren't just these folks, us, right? We aren't just body parts to be sampled. And I think in many ways, the recruitment is in service of sampling parts of us, and not necessarily engaging all of us. And I think that's something that can be pushed for. But I don't know, Marcus, when you were talking about merging the two, or I just got stuck in that language and thinking, like, do we really engage in Blackness or same gender lovingness in these studies? And I'm not sure, seriously, really, if we do. And I think it would be interesting to think about what that would look like beyond, just recruitment and marketing, but what it means to engage us in this research. Yeah.
Maurice just asked a question that I wanted to chime in on about folks who identify as non-binary. One of the studies that I'm involved in, called the Mosaico study, it's HPTN 706, HPX 3002. It's a study that we're doing in collaboration with NIAID as well as Janssen, is inclusive of people who identify as non-binary. And I think we need to get to a place, again, sort of echoing what I said before, and also what Laurent just talked about, what is it that we're looking to do? What are the outcomes of the study? What is it that we're actually looking to determine? And can we meaningfully include people in these studies? And meaningfully should be underscored in these studies, in order to get the answer to the question, but that also allows us to make to say that these results can be applied to all of these different groups too. So I think part of the argument that I've heard against involving lots of different groups in like one clinical trial is that you're not able to take the results and generalize them across the different groups, depending on what the sample size of those individual groups were in a study. So you need, theoretically, a sample size that's large enough to say this effect we expect to see in all kinds of people based on what we saw in this study.
Maurice is my nephew. Hey, Maurice. So one thing that he's mentioning too is about the degree to which these other elements, sexual orientation, romantic orientation, play into medical mistrust. I don't know. I think some of it is stigma and maybe it's a form of mistrust, but I do think people worry about how they're going to be treated in these systems, health systems, research systems, and especially in places where a lot of research happens in healthcare context, that some of this research requires people to disclose things that I'm not sure they can trust people, or if they can trust people with that type of information, because it could have repercussions for them. And so I think that's something that we can take for granted. Folks who live in places like New York City, like me, and maybe not quite in New York City, but I think coming from where I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, it is very different to just say I'm Laurent, I'm same gender loving or gay or whatever, and just that's it, just sort of walk home and nothing be thought of it. Like, it's gonna be something. It may not be drastic problems, but it's not, the climate does not sort of support that type of openness. And that could be playing into people's hesitance about getting involved in research when the research is about, us.
Yeah, they answer that one. I can go with something different. You can give me a different one.
Good. So far, I think this has been a very robust conversation. We've covered a lot of things. We got a lot of activity going on in the comments, and I'm just super excited about where the discussion has been going and how we've been moving through the conversation. So, for example, Dr. Nelson, you mentioned a study earlier that was successful based on some steps you all took. Are there any studies that you all can successful trials, successful studies that you all can direct us to that have centered Black folks, that have centered Black family and loving folk? And some of these studies are actually based on some of the stuff that we do now, and some of the things we enjoy now that people don't know were based out of clinical research. Are there any things that you all can share with us that maybe we can look up and go find links to, just to learn a little bit more about the research that has been done for this particular group of strange love? Black men.
One of the precursors to 073 that Laurent mentioned was another study by HPTN 061. It was a multi-site study that focused on Black same-gender loving men broadly. But I think that there was also some degree of inclusion for trans persons as well, trans women specifically. So yeah, that to me was, I think I can't say this unequivocally, but I think that's probably one of the studies that's recruited the most amount of Black same gender loving men in this country. So it's a vanguard study in many different ways, and the results of that study were meaningful, and I think contributed to the development of 073 as well.
And that study was
HPTN, HIV Prevention Trials Network, and when we hear VTP, that's HIV Vaccine Trials Network.
Correct.
You know, we're acronym people, so just in case some other folk are listening that don't know, like HPTN 051, that's what those mean. Sorry, Dr.
Sure, I apologize. It's child.
No. So HPTN 061, that was a study where there was also intervention by Black same-gender loving people. The Black Gay Research Group at the time, I think the National Black Gay Men's Advocacy Coalition, because that study was on its way out the door. It was when we learned about it, we got called into a meeting and this was being described, and we thought, oh, this is interesting study. It's with Black gay men, yeah, okay. So here's our feedback. Here's some things that you should work on and think about and fix, and then you can come back and we can have another conversation and see how close you are getting to a finalized product. And they say, oh no, honey, it's final. We're about to start recruiting. We're like, what? You're about to recruit 1,500 Black same-gender loving men across the U.S. Yeah. It's the first time none of us had even heard about it. Yeah. This was like 13 Black same-gender loving researchers from across the country who had never even heard about it. And it was funded, and it was about to start recruiting in 6 U.S. cities. So anyway, that we changed, and there was not a Black same-gender loving man leading the study, not even on the leadership team. So we had to organize to change some things, and actually, that's the study that Daryl Wheeler joined as a co-chair. But I agree that was the largest study at the time with Black same-gender loving men. And I will say that I'm very proud that Stefan, Daniel, and I are on a team that is an upcoming study for HPTN. The number is 096, and that will be the largest study of Black same-gender loving men in the U.S. Right now, it's set up to be a community randomized controlled trial of 16 communities across the South. It's a multi-component study that's designed to reduce new HIV infections among Black same-gender loving men across the South. So you'll hear more about it. So HPTN 096, sometimes it's called Getting to Zero. So keep your eyes and ears open for that. It is a study that's being led by Black same-gender loving men. We're all up in it and through it. And some of the ways this is an unprecedented study, but it is because there are people like Daniel and Stefan and Laurent and others on the study who are pushing forward something that makes sense for us and our communities, and so we think it will be very impactful. So pay attention for that.
And when I say every sentence, you stop and no, what do we mean by this right here? Like every page, every email, everything, and if the process wasn't being led by, like someone like Laurent, who is just steadfast, he stands flat-footed on the floor and be like, no, girl, no. Go back to slides, and it's woven with Stefan, and like I'm a baby researcher, so the people pull my coattail because I'm like, girl, no, what is wrong? But every day is a fight, and just to think of all of the rooms that have these conversations about us, and we're not there. I took a phone call earlier this week about joining a community advocacy board for the COVID, some of the COVID studies that's going on here in Atlanta. And I literally can pull an email that I said the same thing back in 2009. And it's 2020, and the email can read like I wrote it this morning. It's still ensuring that we see Black people. In Fulton County, 74% of the people who have died due to COVID are Black people. And the advertisements that we see connected to COVID had a Black woman at the back of the pack. Like, come on. It's ensuring that we know how to get in contact with the co-PIs of this study if you have any questions. Like, who are the people on the community advocacy board? Like, how are we defining community? Engagement means something different to every one of the study directors, and all of these things ultimately creates additional barriers, not only for us to get to the study, but ultimately for us to be our healthiest, So it's all of us. It's everybody in this comment line over here, should be sending us emails to join like our community strategy group, You know, it's ensuring that these are the folks that are making principal investigators in your own hometown stop and explain what they're doing, you know, let alone getting the research study back when the paper was finished. So I think all of this is that conversation.
And let me just say one more thing is, you know, Daniel said something about how do we define community? And that is a very serious statement, because I do think it is very important that as we think about how the importance of Black cisgender loving men participating in research, like they can't be the only ones to hear that message, right? So there are cousins and aunties and brothers and sisters, like they're going to talk to other people around who need to also understand what this is, who need scientific literacy as well, because that's who they listen. That's who we listen to. We don't just listen to each other or people that we see in our social or sexual networks. And so I think we have to be careful. We should be deliberate about how we sort of approach or understand what communities are, the communities in which Black cisgender loving men live. It's not like we all live in Chelsea, in New York, or Midtown in Atlanta, or, you know, the Castro. Some of us live in them places, but I think our approaches can't be that such that we assume that we all live in these small little enclaves, and that's where we get our information from. So I think that can also go a long way in helping make sure folks understand the value of this and maybe more likely to want to contribute as participants.
So we're about 3 minutes from our turn. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask each of you to give a final thought. And but before you do that, I want to ask a question. So we had made a decision before we got on, in our staff time, that we were going to give away two $50 gift cards. The first one was going to go to the 13th comment on the chat, but they must still be on here now. And that 13th person was Ronaldo Henrique. So Ronaldo Henrique, if you're still here, say something, because if so, I have $50 for you. If not, I don't have $50 for you. And the question,
he's in Brazil. He no
cheating, no. But if he is, tell him to say something. We have that. And the last one, I'm going to ask a question. And the first person answers. So we have one of our colleagues behind the scenes that are managing these. The first person to answer. There have been 3 studies that have numbers, right, that have been talked about on this call. And one of them is a newer one that they're currently working on. The first person that can name all 3 of those studies will be the second.
Ooh, shade, honey. You're doing numeracy on here too. You touching everything. We touched the whole gamut tonight.
Yeah. So we're talking about 3 studies that they mentioned. The first person that gets those will get that second gift card. So
actually, there were 4.
Were there 4?
There were 3 numbers, but there were 4 mentioned.
I wrote 3 with numbers.
Well, I got all 4, so can I get the money?
Well, sir, you get something else. We'll talk about that offline. So I'm gonna go with the 3 because I don't even have the 4th one written down. But if you get the 4th one, hey, maybe we'll feature you on the next session. So
we got some answers. I just sent you the 4th one.
See what the 4th one was. We ain't gonna do them like that. But while we're getting these, and Jill, let me know. And it's the first person that pops up on the screen with it. Look like, is it Christopher?
Christopher don't count. No.
Give your final thoughts, and this is the lightning round. Give your final 30-second thoughts, because we want to give people their time to get 7:30. Thank you all so very much. Thank you all for tuning in. The next session that we have coming up is going to be navigating the South as a trans woman, and we have There are spectacular trans women that will be telling their stories from different parts of the South and how they navigate. Some move to Atlanta to navigate, some stay in their rural cities to navigate, and we're going to have that conversation. My face will not be here next week, but Justine Ingram, who works on a team with me here at Southern AIDS Coalition, will be leading up that conversation. Thank you all so very much. 30 seconds, each of you give your final comments, and from me, I am out.
30 seconds for me. I just say the community knows exactly what we need to do, okay? I think we, as community members, just have to find additional ways to plug into the system and change it out. Like, spend these white people money, okay? Answer these questions and make it best for our community to thrive. Stefan.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Clue, for getting the HVTN study. I will say that I think the important thing is really that we have much more power than we realize. And working together, we can absolutely use that power to move our community forward with respect to research, with respect to treatment and cure work, and really with respect to reducing the impact of HIV in our community broadly. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I appreciate having the chance to be on this panel with my friends and colleagues. I think that it is important for folks to understand that they might not always see the positive impact of their participation immediately, but there's so many things we can point to that we would not have if there were not people like us who are willing to participate in the studies. And so I don't know if we always say that, but I want everybody at least here to know that the participation is critical. There's some things that can help us understand things we can do right now. But many times these are things that may take years in order for them to become things that we can benefit from as a community, as a society. But it cannot happen unless we're participating. And so it is for a greater good. And to those for who that is a compelling argument, I present that to you too. And then, you know, something that may be worthwhile to tell other people. But thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much. At this time, we are going to put the flyer for next week on the screen where you can see it. You can screenshot it. We'll be here, but not next week, in 2 weeks. We're doing it every other Thursday, same time right here. Just like y'all shared this, we'll continue to share for us, continue to get the word out. We want to have these important, meaningful conversations so that people know that we're the Southern AIDS Coalition, and to continue the legacy of founder Marvell L of SOS. We want to continue these conversations because there's not much like this that is specifically for Black LGBTQ plus people. We want to make sure we keep these conversations going. For updates, you can also go to sosexperience.org. And for updates about the Southern AIDS Coalition, you go to southernaidscoalition.org. And you can find out whatever you want to do. Whatever you want to know about us. We do a whole lot of stuff. We try to do a whole lot of work. We try to engage the community. And we're just trying to do the work that people can be proud of. So thank you all very, very, very much. Daniel, Dr. Stefan, Dr. Nelson, soon to be Dr. Griffin with Georgia State coming up. Thank you all so very much. Thanks everybody for tuning in. You all have a good night. Stay tuned for the flyer that's going to be put up on the screen, and we'll see everybody next time.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.